Sit back, relax, and maybe grab a snack because the story I'm about to tell you is a little long, but also good. Oh, was I not supposed to grab a snack? I'm telling the story. Okay, cool. So the guy telling us the story says that he's only ever shared this with a handful of people, and that's because he understands that it sounds crazy, but what he's about to share is very real. So he says growing up, him and his brother Emilio were very close. They would do everything together, they were inseparable, and he says that every day after school, they would always race to the pier. He said that they would never get tired of like running in between people's boats or even getting their fishing reels and playing with them. But he says that out of nowhere, his brother Emilio just started acting really weird. He noticed that every night when everybody was asleep, Emilio would get up and get out of the room and he doesn't know where he would go. He said that in the beginning, he thought he was only getting up to go to the restroom. However, he found out that he was not just going to the restroom, he was actually leaving the house, and that was because one night he followed his brother Emilio, and that's when he saw that he was leaving out the front door. Before he left, he actually told Emilio, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" He said that Emilio very calmly told him that he was gonna go to the pier because his friends were waiting for him. He said that that got him very confused because Emilio didn't have any friends that lived close by. He tried to convince his brother to come back inside and go to bed, but Emilio told him that it was okay for him not to worry, that he wasn't gonna take long and that everything was gonna be okay. He had no choice but to let his brother leave, and he also mentioned that this started happening now every single night. Emilio would leave every night telling him the same thing, that he was gonna go meet his friends at the pier. He explains that Emilio did not care how many times he got after him or tried to get him in trouble, like he insisted on going out to the pier to meet with his friends. He says that one night he just decided that he couldn't just ignore this any longer, and he decided to follow Emilio. He said that it was a very cold night and the only light source that he had was the moon. He says that he noticed that Emilio never had shoes on when he left the house and that he tried to keep him at a distance because he didn't want Emilio to catch him. So he followed Emilio all the way to the pier, and he saw where he sat down at the edge and basically dangled his feet above the water. He was laughing and talking with somebody, but from where he was, he couldn't fully see who he was laughing and talking with. He got a little bit closer, making sure that he wasn't making any noise, and as he got closer is when he saw who Emilio was laughing and talking to. In the beginning, he had no idea what he was looking at. There were two figures in the water, and they were right in front of Emilio. He says that they had human faces, but they were all deformed, almost as if they had masks of something that maybe one day were human. He could tell that where the eyes should be was just open and sunken in, like there's no eyeballs, and that their mouths were like all twisted, and it was just terrifying. And the worst part about it was that he can tell that these things were like enjoying and laughing and having conversations with Emilio, almost as if they were old friends. Oh my god, I have chills. He said that he immediately wanted to scream at Emilio to get back away from them, but like his body didn't let him. He was terrified. He was in shock. It was also in that moment where he noticed that one of those figures in the water saw him. He said that he noticed that the thing's eyes, if that's what you want to call them, because obviously they had no eyeballs, were like stuck on him, like glued on him, and that twisted laugh smile was immediately gone. He said that he felt like this thing was only looking at him to see if he could like take him over, like almost as if it was deciding what to do with him. And that's when the second figure that was in the water also turned its head towards him, and in a split second both of those figures went underneath the water, and that is when he saw two giant tails, almost as if they were mermaids. Side note, I feel like if mermaids were real, this is what they would be looking like. It's not like the Little Mermaid Ariel, like not that pretty, but anyway, that's if you believe in these type of things. In that moment is when Emilio finally turned to look at his brother, and he looked terrified. He ran up to him, and Emilio tells him, "Please don't tell mom and dad," almost crying. "If they find out, they're never gonna let me come back to the pier." He says that he grabbed Emilio's arm, walked his ass all the way back home without even saying a word. He was in shock, and it was only until they were inside of the house in their room where he turns to Emilio and said, "What were those things? Why were you so calm with them? Like, why were you so talkative and laughing with them. Emilio explains that for a few weeks he had been woken up by like a singing that made him go to the pier because it felt like it was calling out to him. Emilio said that in the beginning he was scared, but after a while he got very curious. The very first time he actually saw them, he went to the pier and that he was very scared, but that they started talking to him and that they didn't do anything back to him. That they could tell that he was very scared, so they talked to him very calmly and gained his trust. Emilio explained that ever since that first meeting, they would call to him every night. Emilio tells his brother that they want him to swim with them. He says that they told him that it was going to be fun, but that he was kind of scared because he didn't know how to swim. And Emilio admitted to his brother that he was scared that they were going to drown him. He says that when Emilio tells him this, he felt a terror that he had never felt before, and he even told Emilio that he would not be going to the pier anymore. Not even during the day, not even after school. They would not be setting foot in that pier ever again. After that, Emilio would wake up his brother and tell him every time his friends were calling out to him, and he said that he would assure that Emilio would never leave the house, even if it meant that he had to stay up all night so that he didn't leave. He says thankfully with time, Emilio stopped hearing that calling or that singing that was attracting him to the pier. He explains that the worst of it came after. Obviously, he's grown up and he was still in the area, and he had been by the pier because he was talking to one of the fishermen there. He for some reason felt very safe and comfortable to tell this man the story of what happened to Emilio those years ago. When he finished telling him the story about what happened to Emilio, this fisherman had dropped everything he had been doing, looked at him with like a very straight face, and this fisherman who had been working at that pier his entire life explains to him that in that area of the pier for many years kids would disappear, and that they had never found like any of these children's bodies, not even an article of clothing. He explains that he feels like Emilio got so lucky that he wasn't taken because it's obvious that something was going on in that area. He thinks that these beings were trying to take him somewhere where nobody has returned from. He explains that even though years have passed by and this seems to be history for them, sometimes he wakes up in the middle of the night and he swears that he could hear like a singing or a song, and it feels like it's calling out to him.